Shingo is a lonely, ugly loser that is stuck in his dead-end office job. But one day, he reincarnates as a noble in the world of sword and magic. The only problem left is that he has so many older brothers that he's basically treated like a poor and ugly peasant. How will Shingo be able to become the strongest magician in the land and live off without any problems? The episode starts with our boy hero standing alone in the middle of a barren wasteland. Fierce men armed with pickaxes look aggressively at him. The boy raises his hand and concentrates, his magic coalescing in his right arm. He then releases the magic beam, destroying the boulders and rocks in front of him, thereby flattening the land. Behind him, the men cheer, and they go back to work, mining the ground. The boy, nicknamed Well, watches as his men tills the land with their pickaxe and carts away the broken stones. Another boy approaches him and compliments his use of magic. Even the workers couldn't believe that the Count's magic is actually being used to develop the land. Well smiles and is about to leave, but his butler, Roderick, asks for his assistance in clearing out more land. A few hours later, a tired Well finally teleports back to his house. A group of girls happily welcome him back home, and he joins them for tea. They start teasing how Roderick is basically working him like a slave. Well admits that he's already used to it from working in white-collar jobs, but the girls have no idea what he means. He heads back to his room, but he sighs in disappointment. Despite it being already 10 years since he was an office worker, he's still not used to his new world. 10 years ago, Shingo was just a normal office worker in his dead-end job, going home to his apartment all alone and cooking for himself. One night, he was about to eat a late-night dinner when he accidentally fell asleep in front of his meal. But when he opened his eyes again, he suddenly found himself in front of a different meal. He then notices on a plate that a different face is staring back at him. He had become a child in a different world. There are musicians playing, and it looks like he's in a wedding celebration. At first, he thought that he was just overseas, but all the people were speaking Japanese. He guessed that he might be dreaming, but it was very realistic. Even the meal in front of him felt so real when he poked it. He closes his eyes to wake up from his dream, but a voice tells him to wake up. An old man tells him to get up so he can introduce himself to everyone. The man then brings him over to a group of guests and urges Shingo to introduce himself. Shingo panics as he stares at all the adults looking down on him. Thankfully, another older boy, named Erich, introduces him as his youngest brother, Wendelin von Benno Baumeister, or Well for short. Is he really in another world because that sounds like a German name? What do you guys think? Comment below. Afterward, Erich sits down beside Well and asks him if his mind went blank earlier. Well tries to fish for information out of Erich, and since he's only 5 years old, Erich explains everything to him again. Today is their eldest brother Kurt's wedding. He married the second daughter of Sir Mainbach, Amalie. Their father was actually having trouble finding a wife for his heir, so he was relieved that a noble's daughter chose to marry into their family. Well also learns that they are actually part of the nobility, too. As the night progresses, more and more people start toasting and enjoying the alcohol. Well is still getting used to his new body and trying to cope with his new situation. He is at least thankful that he understands the language automatically and can even read the words written on the signs. Based on this lavish ceremony for his brother, Well guesses that they are probably a pretty rich family, and if he is the third son, then that means he doesn't have to worry about working or starving. Well picks up his fork and goes back to enjoying the feast. The next day, Well is confused when the breakfast served in front of him seems to be wrong. It was composed of dry, hard bread and soup that is basically water. His family is enjoying the meal like normal, but looking all around him, Well notices that the wallpapers are peeling. The paintings on the walls are fading, and even their table is barely held up by scraps of wood. When his brother returns home from fishing, Well asks him about their family situation. They threw such a fabulous party last night, so why do they seem poor? Erich explains to him that they cannot be cheapskates when they have guests, so they have to keep up appearances. But in reality, they are dirt poor. The cracked walls were actually just covered with curtains last night, and the food they ate was a special menu. But now, they are back to hard bread and watery soup every day. Well doesn't understand this. He's still the third son of a noble family, so he should still be getting something. To his surprise, his brother Erich then greets another brother of theirs, Helmut, who was out hunting. Two more young men join their conversation, Paul and Hermann. Then, Erich also mentions that two more brothers of theirs weren't able to attend the wedding. Well finally realizes that they are not only poor nobles, he is the 8th son of a poor noble family. It looks like his parents had too much fun in the bedroom. Later, Well tries to study his new surroundings. They are in the kingdom of Helmut, with the capital Stuttgart having 1 million citizens. In the south is the dukedom of Bleichroder, but even further south of this is the countryside they're in, the Baumeister Knightdom. It is a very rural place with only 800 people, and he is the 8th son of the noble family there. Well is getting depressed about his new life. But then he notices his 3 brothers saying farewell to their mom. He runs to ask them what's happening, so Erich reveals that they are actually leaving. They cannot divide up their lands, so brother Kurt will inherit all of it and brother Hermann will marry into the branch family. As for the others, they would have to start their own life in the capital and cease to be nobles. Erich pats Well in the head and advises him to learn some skills already and stop goofing off. Well sadly waves goodbye to them as his brothers depart. He then heads straight to their family's library to start preparing for his future. Unfortunately, all the books he seems to find are either poetry books or love books. As he was returning the books to the shelf, he accidentally knocked a box off. The box contains a piece of paper and a crystal ball. When Well reads the paper, it explains that the crystal ball is a magic aptitude crystal, which can measure one's magic potential. Well was about to dismiss the paper since magic couldn't be real, but he remembers that he's now in a different world. He continues reading and learns that in 1,000 people, only one person has enough mana to cast magic spells. Well already feels his hopes slipping away, but he trudged on. The paper further explains that magic isn't hereditary. Anyone can have the talent to be a great magician, so the crystal can help you find out if you can be one. Well doesn't really believe that he will be that lucky to have magic potential, but he decides that it's worth a try. He puts the crystal ball on the desk and tries to push out his mana into it. However, nothing happens. This is exactly what Well predicted will happen, so he's not really disappointed. But to his surprise, the ball abruptly starts glowing brilliantly with white light. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a long-haired man feels a disturbance and looks around. Back in the castle, Well is still shocked that the crystal ball actually reacted to him. He picks up the paper and tries to find out what it means. According to the text, the ball will shine like a rainbow if he has a high aptitude for magic. Thus, they advise the user to recommend learning magic through specialized guides. Well starts tearing through the library looking for these guidebooks. However, all he can find are novels, travel guides, and random poetry books. There are no magic books anywhere. His father then arrives at the library looking for Well. Well tries to ask his father if they have any other books, but his father admits that he cannot actually read, so they only have that one room of books. He does ask Well to go to the forest and gather firewood. Later in the forest, Well tries to cast magic with a random stick, but whatever he does, he cannot seem to activate his magic. He slumps to the ground, sad, but a voice suddenly starts talking to him. It was coming from a long-haired man that floated down the sky. The man was glad that he finally found someone on the same wavelength as himself. He kneels in front of Well and asks him for his name, but Well shakes in terror and tries to scare him off with his stick. The man apologizes for scaring him and gently throws away the stick. He explains to Well that he is a magician. Meanwhile, the stick the man threw falls down a nearby cliff and accidentally dislodges a large boulder. The boulder comes tumbling down the cliff and shakes the surroundings on impact. The man and Well looked down the cliff to see what happened, and they saw that the boulder actually landed on top of a huge wild boar. The boar pushes the boulder off and spots them on top of the cliff. Thinking that they were trying to kill it, the boar charges up the cliffside. The boar lets out a piercing roar and Well tries to run away. However, the man abruptly grabs hold of Well and stops him from fleeing. He pulls Well back and points Well's hands towards the boar. He then urges him to picture his wind magic. Well screams out, but the man starts explaining that he first has to imagine his mana circulating throughout his body. They both start glowing in green light, and energy concentrates on Well's hand. Well is still panicking as the boar charges toward them, but his magic finally coalesces and wind blasts out of his hand, pushing the boar back. The boar is still angry, however, but this time, the man uses his own magic to throw it aside. He then finally introduces himself as a former court magician of the Blykeroder Dukedom, Alfred Rainford. Back at home, Well is still getting constantly disappointed with their daily fare. For dinner, they have tea, which is so diluted that it's basically water. Meanwhile, the tea he had with Alfred was fantastic. After their encounter with the boar, Alfred explains over a cup of tea that he wants to pass on his magic to Well. Well is curious why when he can't even pay for it. But Alfred just wants a disciple. Before they start training, Alfred warns Well that he should keep his magic a secret. If people find out, they might insist he be the next lord instead, leading to a succession dispute. The next day, their first training session involves matching capacities. This means that Well would be able to match his mana capacity to someone who has more. The two hold hands and start circulating mana through both of their bodies. Well is amazed when he feels Alfred's mana, while Alfred congratulates him. He was worried that Well wouldn't be able to match his mana capacity since capacities are determined at birth. But Well even surpassed his own capacity and is not even full yet. Back at home, Well's father is looking at the crystal ball in their family library. He is wondering why the crystal ball has moved from its previous location. He remembers that Well was there the other day and he laughs. His heir, Kurt, laughs as well, and they guess that Well probably got depressed upon seeing his lack of magic talent. Meanwhile, Well is actually practicing his fire magic. Alfred applauds him for learning advanced magic, even though a few days have only passed. He also brought along a basket of mountain vegetables since Well has to keep up the illusion that he's just doing chores in the forest. Later that night, their family praises Well for gathering a lot of vegetables. Kurt looks annoyed while their father asks Well where he got a particular vegetable. That vegetable grows only at the other side of the river, so did Well fly across it using magic? He then laughs at the hilariousness of it, while Kurt is starting to wonder if Well actually has magic. A few days later, Well and Alfred are flying through the sky with Well practicing how to use tracking magic. Well sensed the vibration and topography of the land beneath them, and when he found his target, he launched a powerful wind-propelled rock at it. They then roast the bird and share it between the two of them. Well even had a bottle of spicy wasabi that he offered to Alfred. Alfred didn't even seem to notice the spiciness of the wasabi. While enjoying their meal, Alfred warns Well not to go deep inside the woods. The forest is still home to lots of monsters way out of Well's level. The forest does contain lots of foodstuffs and rare herbs, so people are attracted to it, but they never return. After the meal, Well reveals to Alfred that he feels like Kurt is watching him lately. Wherever he goes, Kurt seems to follow and secretly watch him. Alfred guesses that Kurt might have realized Well's magical potential and is worrying about his position as heir. Truth be told, Well doesn't really like being lord. It sounds like a pain, and he also doesn't want to cause trouble for his sibling. On the other hand, he also doesn't really have any plans for the future. Alfred suggests that he can try adventuring, which actually piques Well's interest. He closes his eyes and wonders about his future. Meanwhile, a violet aura abruptly appears in Alfred's arm. Alfred grabs his hand and hides it from Well. He pushes the aura back, begging for more time. Thankfully, he succeeds. During dinner, Well reveals his plans of becoming an adventurer to his family. His big bro looks happy about this news, but their father points out they don't have enough money to enroll Well at the Adventurers Academy. At their next training session, Alfred shows Well the town where the Adventurers Academy is, at the town of Brightburg. It is a mercantile town, so everyone can join merchant guilds. Well realizes that he can earn money by joining one and selling items. But first, he has to learn how to travel there. One way to do that is through travel magic, specifically flying magic. Alfred then grabs Well by his arms before flying high into the sky. At first, Well screams like a little girl until Alfred slows down and Well sees the vast and wonderful world all around them. Later that night, Alfred has to fight off his dark curse again. The next day, Well is practicing his flying magic when Alfred reveals to him that it is their last training session. Well tries to ask him to stay because they have only been training together for 2 weeks, but Alfred shuts down his cries. During dinner time, their father shares that a whispering dead was spotted in the forest. This is an undead creature that looks like a human and can even speak to people. Nevertheless, it's already a corpse, so it cannot feel pain. After a few years, this undead will lose its consciousness and become a zombie. Well suddenly remembers how Alfred felt cold to the touch and how he easily ate spicy wasabi. Concerned about his master, Well flies through the dark forest in search of him. The darkness made him tumble into the ground, but he finally meets with Alfred. Well warns him about the undead in the forest and tries to pull him along, but Alfred admits that he is actually the Whispering Dead. 5 years ago, he was accompanying the Duke in search of medicine, but they were attacked by monsters. Alfred fought while the Duke tried to retreat, and in the end, he met his doom when his mana ran out. However, he became an undead because he still has a wish he wants to accomplish. That wish is for him to be able to pass on his magic knowledge. So when he sensed Well's presence, he was overjoyed. He can finally move on. All that Well has to do is pass his final trial. He wants Well to purge him with holy magic. Well tries to protest, but Alfred shows the spreading undeath in his body. He cannot hold on much longer and he will become a zombie. Alfred starts teaching Well how to use holy magic. When Well starts casting the magic, the black aura surrounding Alfred starts getting purged away and Alfred screams in pain. Nevertheless, he still urges Well to continue. Tears start spilling out of Well's eyes since he doesn't want to say goodbye to his master, but Alfred asks him to remember everything he taught. Well bows and thanks Alfred before finally releasing him from his undead state. Alfred smiles in relief as he slowly fades into the light, and he advises Well to live his life. Well screams his pain and suffering into the night, but he wipes away his tears and smiles. He promises to follow his teacher's last words. A few years later, Well waves goodbye to his mother as he leaves home to accomplish his dream of becoming an adventurer. The Adventurer Academy is lively and full of noises from students sparring together. In one classroom, newly enrolled pupils are introducing themselves. A blue-haired chick introduces herself as Louise, while a pink-haired girl introduces herself as Ina. After Well introduces himself, their teacher hands out papers for them to fill out. This is the bane of all students, a group work. They would have to make a party with other students. During dinner, Well feels so lonely already since no one ever sat next to him. On a nearby table, Louise and Ina are gossiping about him. Well was the only scholarship student of their batch. Another boy, a blonde named Erwin, shares that Well's magic power is so high that even the instructor gave up on teaching him. If anyone was able to get on a party with him, their whole academy life would be a breeze. That is actually why everyone seems to be already starting at Well, and is afraid to come near him. Thankfully, Erwin already has a plan. They guess that Well is always alone because he's busy appraising them. That's why if they all team up, with Erwin being the best swordsman, Louise the best martial artist, and Ina the best spearwoman, they can entice Well to join their group. Meanwhile, Well still has no idea what the others think about him. He decides to make friends by sharing his condiments. But his plan was interrupted when a group of students loudly confronted Erwin's group. They announced that Well would join their group, the Axe Trios, and not theirs. Meanwhile, Well has no idea what they are talking about, and he just gets jealous how the others are all so close already. So he sits back down sadly. In their next class, their teachers assign them to go hunting. Well is excited to form a party with others, but he soon sees everyone already in their own groups. On the next table, Louise wonders if they should invite Well, but Erwin shuts her down because they might disappoint Well if they are too hasty. They misunderstood Well's solo party as a challenge for them to capture more creatures if they want to join his level. A few hours later, the students present their prey to the instructor. Erwin's group is pretty confident since they caught 3 whole boars. When Well enters, he pulls out a magic bag given to him by Alfred and starts pulling out various animals. Soon, he filled up the whole table. Seeing his strength, The Axe trio gives up on making Well their party members since he's clearly out of their league. The others also see this and leave the room. Meanwhile, Well, who is suffering from success, is receiving the bounty from his kills. He was about to invite everyone to join him for a meal, but when Bro turned around, no one was there. That night, Erwin is sharing his woes to the girls. Since they were all not the eldest children, they were treated as disposable. The worst thing is that when they awakened their powers, they became more op than their family. Thus, their parents and siblings avoided them due to embarrassment. They are getting angry that their dreams are getting trampled on just because they were born late. They decide not to give up and make Well recognize them. The next day, Erwin and the girls delve deep into the forest, but they immediately get surrounded by wolves. Thankfully, Well is hunting nearby and senses them with his tracking magic. He might become their friends if he saves them, so he quickly zooms toward the scene. Erwin, Louise, and Ina are doing their best fighting off the wolves, but their superior numbers are proving too much to handle. Erwin gets injured, and more wolves jump at them. But Well finally arrives. With one spell, rock spikes quickly fill up the area, flinging the wolves back and protecting the guys within. Later, they apologize to Well for the trouble and explain that they just wanted to make him recognize them. Well was confused, but the others further admit that the magic Well used is truly S rank, and he is in a whole other world than them. Thus, they are giving up on forming a party. Well was about to stop them, but their instructor barges in and happily announces that they are all invited by the Duke for a party. Their classroom was abuzz with their invitation to such a prestigious army. However, one party pooper guesses that they were all probably invited because the Duke is trying to get in contact with their great mage classmate. Well overhears this and gets sad that they all think so lowly of themselves. The only ones who didn't care were Erwin and the girls, who were already planning on what to wear. At the party, their classmates' guess was proven true when Duke Bleichroder ignored the others and went straight to talk to Well. The Duke introduces himself as Amadeus and greets Well. He invites Well for a private discussion, but to the shock of everyone, Well also invites Louise, Ina, and Erwin with the justification that they are his party members. Inside the Duke's mansion, Duke Amadeus introduces Well to his current court magician, Brantag Ringstadt. He is also Alfred's former teacher. Brantag reveals that he actually felt Alfred's presence disappear 7 years ago. Since Alfred was an undead, Brantag guesses that Alfred finally fulfilled his wish and found a disciple. Well now came from the same region where Alfred died, and he is even carrying Alfred's magic bag. So is he Alfred's disciple? Well admits that he is and tells Brantag of his master's last moments. Brantag was sad that a child had to go through exercising his own master. But he's also thankful to Well for giving Alfred peace. Well then returns the contents of the magic bag, which was the supplies from the Duke's army when he went to the forest in the past. After the meeting, Ina and the others are discussing what they had just overheard earlier. They are ashamed to judge Well in the past. In reality, Well was just like them, the spare son of their noble parents. When Well arrives, they all apologize to him. They also admit that they were actually only planning to use Well's power to improve their own lives by being at a party with him. Well laughs and admits that he actually just used them earlier. He didn't want to be alone with the creepy Duke, so he made them tag along. However, he does want to be at a party with them. The others laugh and happily accept him. Meanwhile, the Duke arrives and informs Well that he will actually get a finder's fee for returning Alfred's belongings. This totals to 1,000 gold coins, and it turns out Well will also inherit Alfred's estate. Later that night, Well is having a meal at his new mansion. It was so big that he felt alone once again. He wonders if the others would be willing to live with him. Well and his friends are in a magic airship flying in the sky on the way to the capital. They are on their way to attend his brother Erich's wedding. Louise was so excited that she's already wearing her most flamboyant outfit, ready to riz her way into becoming a noble's employee. She is hoping to attract any nobles who might hire her as a retainer. Erich is marrying into the Brandt family, so there should be nobles around. Meanwhile, Erwin is busily clutching a pole, not to dance, but because he doesn't trust a flying ship not to fall from the sky. Brantag, who is acting as their guide to the capital, assures them that a magic airship would never fall out of the sky. Unfortunately for him, he spoke too soon, as dark clouds abruptly filled the sky. And in the middle of this storm, a huge skeletal dragon appears. The passengers immediately turn into Karens and complain to the crew about the dragon. However, the crew assures them that they will get rid of the dragon. After all, they have the great magician, Brantag, aboard. Meanwhile, inside the ship's bridge, Brantag is actually already admitting defeat against the dragon. He cannot beat an undead dragon because he cannot use holy magic to purge it. However, he does know someone who can. He then turns to Well. Well tries to reject them, but Brantag peer pressures him to do it. Well uses flight magic to approach the skeletal dragon, which quickly breathes out dark miasma at him. He is unscathed thanks to a timely placed barrier, but the trees underneath them all rotted away. As for the airship, Brantag is maintaining a large barrier around it to protect the passengers from the battle. Well starts casting holy magic, but the dragon notices them and charges in for an attack. What ensues next is a game of cat and mouse as Well flies to dodge the dragon's claws. Thankfully, he manages to finish his spell and casts it on the dragon. The dragon tries to retaliate, but Well's magic strikes through its acid breath and hits it directly. The dragon didn't want to die alone. I mean, who does? So the dragon attacks Well with his dying strength. Well uses a magic barrier again to shield himself, and a few seconds later, the dragon disintegrates and its bones fall off. Well starts to collect the bones using his magic bag, and while he is doing so, he sees a large red gem along with the bones. It was the dragon's core. The passengers held a party back at the ship, and Brantag introduces a former party member of his, Eritrio, who is now a merchant. The next morning, everyone is still sloshed from the party last night, while Well and his friends are already looking towards the horizon, where the capital city of Strutberg awaits. After they disembark, Brantag gives them the slip, leaving them in the acre of Eritrio. This was just in time because the king's knights had just arrived. They thank Well for slaying the dragon and invites him to the palace. His friends ditch him at the palace doors, and Well was left with Eritrio to meet the king. Thankfully, the king just grants Well the 6th rank of baronet as a reward. At Erich's house, Brantag and the others are talking about Well's promotion. Erich cannot believe that in just a short amount of time, his little brother now outranks even their father. In fact, Well can even start his own noble line now. Ina and the others start to worry that Well might stop being an adventurer. But Brantag assures them that getting a title doesn't mean that. Well is still free to choose what he wants to do. Back in the castle, Well is already feeling the hassle of being a noble. They are currently arguing on how much to pay Well for the magic bones and gem that he looted from the dragon. Cardinal Hohenheim came to Well's rescue and urged the nobles to just compromise on the price. Meanwhile, Eritrio is explaining to Well that the Cardinal and Lord Marshal Edgar are just trying to curry favor from Well to make him side with the church or the military. The sun was already setting when Well was permitted to go home. But outside the castle, a man yells at Well and starts spinning a spear around like a fidget spinner. Eritrio explains that it must be a knight hoping to become his retainer. Thankfully, the human fidget spinner was quickly apprehended and shooed away by the guards. At Erich's wedding, Well found his older brothers looking glum. It turns out that they still hadn't received the wedding gift from their family. This would make their family look rude to the other nobles. Their eldest brother Kurt just sent them a letter detailing how they don't have any money. What's worse is that this would also make the Duke of Bleichroder bad. Normally, a duke would lend money to their vassal if they don't have one, but since their father is too prideful to ask for a loan, people might think Duke Amadeus just refused to lend them money. Seeing their worried faces, Well volunteers to pay for the wedding gift on their behalf. Erich's wedding ceremony was a success and Well claps happily for them. But on the inside, he feels that being a noble is too much of a hassle. Thankfully, Well's fortune finally changed after the party. Eritrio gives him a jar of something that he was hoping to buy in the city. It was a jar of soybeans. Well quickly teleports him and his friends back to his house. They then spent the whole night cooking the soybean, and Well even used magic to hasten its fermentation. All of this so he can get miso soup. He then shares the meal with his friends and family, while promising himself that he will become the best noble he can be. The next episode starts with Well being baptized by Cardinal Hohenheim. As thanks for inviting him to their religion, Well offers the cardinal a substantial gift. At that moment, someone knocks on the door to deliver tea. Well was immediately smitten upon seeing the girl in the nun uniform. She then introduces herself as Elise, Cardinal Hohenheim's granddaughter. When Well stands up to introduce himself, he feels something strange from Elise. He can sense that she can use magic. The cardinal confirms his suspicions and reveals that Elise can actually use holy healing magic. This was impressive because even Well can only use holy purification magic. Elise currently helps by healing the wounded in the church, and she even earned the nickname the Saint Hohenheim. However, Cardinal Hohenheim actually wants Elise to be a normal girl and get married. In fact, a lot of families are already asking for her. Well jokes that he should maybe join the competition for her hand. However, he is still underage. The cardinal agrees and asks him if it would be proper for them to get married once he comes of age. Well laughs in agreement, but his laugh echoes alone. Thus, Well was engaged a few minutes after meeting Elise. After the meeting, Cardinal Hohenheim is having tea alone in his garden. He and his butler are discussing whether it was smart of them to push Well and Elise's engagement through quickly. Cardinal Hohenheim actually even already obtained the king's permission, so even Duke Bleichroder, Well's boss, cannot complain. More importantly, they already saw the advantages of attaching Well to their family. First, the gift he gave was a chest full of gold, meaning Well can already see the power the church wields. As a family holding the rank of viscounts, having Elise marry a baronet will surely prove to be a boon for their family. Meanwhile, at his brother's house, Well shares the news of his engagement to his party members. They are all happy for Well, but Well is the only one unsatisfied. He wanted to first get to know a girl before getting engaged with her. However, his friends explain that not knowing your spouse is actually very common. In fact, his brother Erich only met his wife on the day of their wedding. So now, they urge Well to close his eyes so they can put the clown makeup on him. Well, the clown is currently in disguise because he wanted to tour the capital without everyone trying to suck up to him. In fact, no one recognizes him right now as the Dragon Slayer, even though he's standing in the middle of the store. Erwin urges him to buy something for his soon-to-be wife, which makes Well wonder what Elise thinks about all of this. After his shopping spree, Well was walking through the capital when he accidentally ran into the guy who was begging to be his retainer, the human fidget spinner. Erwin assures him that no one will recognize Well in his clownish outfit, but to their surprise, the spear guy recognizes Well's teeth. People all around them overheard and knights start clamoring for Well to hire them as a retainer. Meanwhile, the spear guy is about to spin his stick again. Well teleports himself before a commotion occurs. Back at their house, Erich suggests to Well that he should just hire a retainer already so he can decline the offers of others. Erwin quickly offers to be Well's retainer, and Well hires him on the spot. Erwin was shocked while Well just pulls out the gift he bought for Elise and leaves the castle. In the meantime, Erwin is still standing, stunned in happiness that he just got a job as a retainer. Well sneaks into the Hohenheim's mansion by teleporting to their garden. The cardinal almost caught him, but he immediately lay down on the ground. When Elise saw him, he immediately grabbed her hand and hid before the cardinal could see both of them. The two hid on the rooftop, where Well pulls out the cookies he bought for Elise. Unfortunately, all the hiding he did crushed the cookies. He hides the cookies behind him and asks Elise if they can just chat for a while. When he asks her about her thoughts on the engagement, Elise just smiles at him and replies that she finds it nice. Her grandfather had chosen Well, and she's happy to become the wife of the Dragon Slayer. Back at their house, Erwin is boasting to Anna and Louise that he is already Well's retainer. The two girls are miffed since they spent the afternoon just shopping for clothes. They wonder if they should ask Well to be his retainer too, but Erwin smiles and lords over how they will become his underlings since he was the first retainer. When Erich and his wife appear, Erwin gets distracted while Louise finds an alternative idea on how they can get above Erwin. All they have to do is become Well's concubines. When Well arrives, Louise immediately tries to riz him with her new clothes and weird dance moves. Well has no idea what she's doing and just leaves the room. Later that night, Louise cuts up her new clothes to better seduce Well. Ina compliments Louise's drive, but Louise admits that she's just doing this in the hopes that her family would acknowledge her when she manages to open her own dojo. Ina was inspired by her motivation and decided to also put in her all. Meanwhile, Well had just received a dinner invitation from Elise. The next day, Elise and Well share a pretty awkward dinner. After the meal, Well was about to leave when the Hohenheim butler leans in and advises Well to give Elise something to commemorate their first date. Thus, they head to a nearby jewelry shop. Rings of various sizes and gems adorn the jewelry shop's shelves. For Well, it all looks tacky and unrefined. Elise quietly insists to Well that he doesn't have to buy her something expensive, but Well assures her that he has money. After all, he still has the reward he got for defeating the dragon. He then spots a pretty plain ring on the shop's corner. The store owner suggests that he should buy something else because it's too plain for an engagement ring. But Well can see how Elise smiles upon looking at the ring. Thus, he decides to buy it. It was actually 6 times more expensive than the normal ones because it was made from a magic stone. After buying the ring for Elise, they head back home. In the carriage ride, Elise asks Well if he actually knew the ring was made from a magic stone. According to the store owner, it can store great magic power, so Well probably bought it, so Elise can be useful in the future. However, Well clarifies that all of that wasn't true. He just chose the ring because he thought that it would suit Elise. He then admits to Elise that throughout his stay in the capital, he was constantly getting exhausted by the pressure of being called a dragon slayer. Likewise, he is amazed by Elise, who was able to withstand the pressure of being called a saint ever since she was young. He then starts putting magic on the ring, and it bathes the carriage in red light. It then creates an illusion of starlight all around them. Amazing Well. Meanwhile, Elise just stares at Well, touched by the heartfelt conversation they just had. Later that night, Cardinal Hohenheim asks their butler his opinion of Well. The butler admits that Well seems to be a hard-to-discern person. However, he did notice that unlike other men who treated Elise like a saint, Well just treated her like a normal young girl. Erwin, Louise, and Ina are enjoying their stay in the capital. Erwin asks the girl how their plan to seduce Well is going, but the girls insist they are in no rush. Well is already busy with Elise in the capital, so they will just seduce him when they return to Breitberg. To their horror, Elise suddenly arrives. Thankfully, she didn't overhear what they were just talking about. Erwin informs her that Well was summoned to the palace. However, Elise wasn't there to meet up with Well, but to actually meet up with them. She wants to ask them what kind of man Well is. Meanwhile, at the palace, the king had just asked Well to slay another dragon. Since he's still technically a noble under the king's rulership, Well has no choice but to agree. The knight commander explains to Well and Brantag their most recent expedition. They plan to develop the nearby Palkenia Prairie to resolve the capital's food shortages. Unfortunately, that prairie is the territory of an ancient dragon named Gregorland, since only mages can withstand a dragon's breath. They want to enlist Well and Brantag's aid in driving away the dragon. Well is unsure if 2 mages can defeat an ancient dragon, but the king has an additional man for the job. A muscular man barges into the room and happily greets them all. He then kneels in front of the king and fiercely declares that the 3 of them will go to the Palkenia Prairie at once and vanquish the dragon. He is the palace magician, Armstrong. Despite looking like a warrior, he is actually a very strong mage. The 3 then depart, flying through the sky towards the prairie. Armstrong is on the lead, surprising Well with his speed. They are currently headed toward the military garrison on the border of Palkenia Prairie. From there, they will finish out a strategy and prepare everything they need before facing the dragon. Back at Erich's place, Erich updates the others regarding Well's new mission. It turns out that Well wasn't sent there just to get rid of the dragon. Once the dragon's gone, the monsters living in the prairie might come out in force and attack the nearby towns. So Well will also have to exterminate them all. He will even be allowed to raise a temporary army to do it. The others ask why a landed noble with an actual army wasn't the one assigned to the mission. But it turns out there was a political reason for it. If another landed noble did it, they might ask for the land. But since Well is just a noble of the robe, they can just reward him with medals and money while the royal family keeps all the land. Meanwhile, they hear a commotion outside their estate's gates. A group of knights is still gathering outside, wanting to be Well's retainer. Leading them is the human fidget spinner, still spinning his spear around. They will be the ones who will make up Well's temporary army. Erwin already pities the one who will lead the ragtag group of knights, but Erich explains that Erwin will actually be the one who will do it. Since Well is in the field, his retainer, Erwin, would have to take up the role. Erwin tries to reject the position, but the others assure him that he will do fine. Thus, Erwin spent the next few days marching the army towards Palkenia Prairie. Their temporary army consists of a noble's child or a masterless retainer, all hoping to earn some glory in the battlefield and rise their rank in society. During the night, Erwin shares his tent with his party members. The girls are actually also getting anxious since this would be their debut battle. Thankfully, they only have to fight against normal monsters compared to Well, whose debut battle was against the skeletal dragon. Another person then shows up to join the campaign. It was Elise, since she can use healing magic. They were ordered to help in the campaign. She asks them where Well is, so Erwin explains that Well is actually camping out near the dragon's den. When dawn arrives, they will start killing it. When dawn arrives, Well, Brantag, and Armstrong look down on the dragon's den. It was in a large crater filled with weird-looking claw-like rocks. The ground then starts shaking as the dragon wakes up from its sleep. The rocks fracture into pieces, revealing the green dragon underneath. The dragon releases an otherworldly roar, signaling the start of the battle. Armstrong quickly casts his armor spell, adorning himself in steel plate armor and armed with a large hammer. He then jumps into the sky to where the dragon is flying and slams his hammer into its head. Well was amazed at Armstrong's strength. Armstrong is using magic that converts his magic power into physical power. On top of that, his armor's defensive strength is much greater than their normal magic barrier. When Armstrong throws the dragon back into the ground, Brantag warns Well that he should get ready. Armstrong wrestles the dragon into the ground, making Well wonder why they even need him in the first place. Brantag points out that Armstrong's magic actually consumes a lot of mana quickly. If his mana runs out, then he'll die. That is why Armstrong is trying to pin down the dragon as quickly as possible so Well can land the final blow. Armstrong gives Well the signal, and Well releases his magic, which then restrains the huge dragon. Meanwhile, back with their army, Elise is looking in the horizon while thinking about Well. Erwin and the others then arrive with breakfast, hoping to distract her from her worrying. They even introduced Elise with Well's favorite food, the miso soup that they created together. Their banter makes Elise happy until another soldier arrives bearing news. Well had just successfully defeated the dragon. Back in the field, Well stores the dragon's corpse in his magic bag. This mission doesn't have a lot of rewards, so they are planning to sell the dragon's corpse to earn more money. However, Armstrong and Brantag warn Well that the hardest part is still to come. After all, Alfred himself wasn't defeated by a strong enemy, but by the sheer number of monsters. A few hours later, Elise is at camp, busily doing all she can to help in healing the wounded. There are so many monsters that wounded soldiers from the front lines keep coming in. The soldiers even say that the only reason they are holding the line is due to the mages. Elise overhears their conversation, and her worry for Well deepens. However, she has to focus on doing her part. She spends the whole night healing everyone she can. She even used the magic stored in her ring that Well gave her. After a while, she sits down to take a break. The knight in front notices her and asks her if she's really engaged with the Dragon Slayer. Elise asks the knight if Well is actually safe in the front lines, but the knight assures her that Well isn't only okay. He's the only reason why they are winning the fight. The knight remarks that heroes like Well are truly above normal people like them. His words make Elise remember the conversation she had with Well. Well didn't actually like being called a hero due to the pressure it comes with. She feels sad for Well's sacrifice since Well is still working hard pretending to be their hero. Elise decides to stay by his side and do her part as the Saint Hohenheim. She spends the whole night healing everyone, and when her mana ran out, she even asks another medic for some medical supplies she can use to mend wounds the old-fashioned way. Thankfully, a soldier soon arrives, shouting out that they have won. Unfortunately, they need a rescue team since Sir Baumeister was injured. Elise panics and runs toward the injured soldiers. She calls out to Well, but when she passes by the group of soldiers, it turns out that the injured person is actually one of Well's brothers. A voice then calls out to her, and it was Well, looking concerned but happy to see her. Elise was filled with so much relief that all her stress comes rushing in all at once and she faints. When Elise woke up, Well was there waiting by his side. Well tells Elise that he heard on the front lines how she healed up every wounded sent back. Everyone was able to fight until the end thanks to the saint's power. Well was about to leave to get her water, but Elise grabs his hand and tells him how she understands his feelings of not being a hero. A little while later, Armstrong arrives and hugs Elise tight. To Well's shock, Armstrong was actually Elise's uncle. A few days later, Well and his party members moved their luggage into a new house. Thanks to their new accomplishments, they ended up staying in the capital indefinitely. Elise drops by to bring some miso soup and Well welcomes her. She also actually wants to clarify something with Well. Since he's living with Louise and Ina, she had thought that he was already engaged to them. Well quickly explains that they are just party members living together, but he also took the chance to ask for her opinion about concubines. However, Elise was perfectly fine with them, just like everyone else Well asked. Thus, he couldn't say no anymore when Louise and Ina once again offered to become his concubines. The next episode begins with another wedding. This time, it was Well's other brother, Helmut, who is now marrying into another knightdom. Each one of them is climbing up in the world, particularly Well, who is garnering the attention of the whole kingdom, especially now that the kingdom is hosting a tournament. All nobles are expected to participate at least once in their life. Unfortunately, there are only swordsmanship, spearmanship, archery, and hand-to-hand. As a noble, Well is expected to be able to use the sword, so he should probably join that one. Well wonders if he could enhance his body with magic, just like Armstrong, but Erich warns him that any form of magic is not allowed. Every morning, Louise, Ina, and Erwin go on their morning run. Erwin always complains to the girls how unfair it is that they use magic to enhance themselves. How he wished he also had enough magic power to do that. Meanwhile, they notice Well flying overhead, looking serious and heading somewhere. Later, Brantag stops over to inform the girls that they are also being ordered to join the tournament by Duke Amadeus. They would have to put up a fight worthy of a noble's daughter. The two girls quickly stood up and left the room. They have to train how to fight without using magic in preparation for the tournament. Meanwhile, Erwin just continues lazing about on the sofa. Even if he gets defeated in the tournament, he has nothing to lose. However, Brantag points out that if he doesn't train himself, the others might see him as a liability in their party and kick him out. During dinner, Well shares the news that the past tournament winner, Warren, is opting to withdraw from the tournament to allow others to shine. This means that it would be a little bit easier for them to earn glory in the tournament. However, he also asks for the others' permission to add Elise to their party. The others readily agree, since Elise's healing magic would surely be a boon for their party. Meanwhile, Erwin feels anxious with his own position in the party. Thus, he loudly proclaims to everyone that he will win the tournament and not get left behind. The next day, Erwin gives his full effort during their jogs, leaving the two girls behind. Meanwhile, an almost dying Well tries to catch up to them. They also did pull-ups and weapons training, with Well failing to control his own sword. Even when the sun goes down, the three still continue with their training, while Well is already sick in bed from exhaustion. Erwin ended up training so much that his hand bleeds from holding his sword, and yet he still continues swinging. The girls are starting to think that maybe Erwin can actually win the whole tournament. Unfortunately, they then received some bad news regarding the tournament. It turns out that Warren was ordered by the king to join the tournament and act as a hurdle for the youths to overcome. Erwin was saddened by this news, and he headed to his room. The girls try to cheer him on, and they insist that even if Erwin doesn't win, that would be okay. However, insists that someone like him, a person with no magic, needs to produce results. The girls wouldn't understand his feelings because they have magic. Ina and Louise were hurt by his words, and they quietly left. The next morning, Erwin tries asking Well if he's going to kick him out of the party if he doesn't win the tournament. However, Well was stressing about something else. It turns out that Elise is also getting anxious about joining their party. Unlike them, she hasn't trained physically at all. Erwin realizes that everyone is actually dealing with their own insecurities, so he heads outside and apologizes to the girls. On the day of the tournament, everyone heads to the arena and gets ready. Elise even arrives bearing a lunchbox for all of them to enjoy after their fights. For Wells' first match, he unexpectedly meets up with his biggest adversary already, Warren, the Knight Commander and the past tournament winner. Well pulls out his sword and hardens his resolve. But when the bell rings, signaling the start of the duel, Warren blitzes his way forward and slams the hilt of his sword to Wells' stomach, knocking him out instantly. When he wakes up, he joins the others for tea while his team members fight in their own rounds. With each win, Erwin climbs up the ranks in the swordsmanship division, Ina in the spearmanship division, and Louise in the hand-to-hand combat division. Unfortunately, Louise met her end in the semifinal round of the preliminaries. Brantag commends her efforts since she managed to get a rude ranking despite her magic fist style being a disadvantage on duels prohibiting magic. As for Ina, she managed to reach the final preliminaries of the spearmanship division and shockingly, her next opponent is the human fidget spinner. He gets excited upon seeing Ina because this means Well might be watching and seeing his performance. At the start of the duel, Bro stepped forward and started thrusting into Ina. Ina tries to counterattack, but Bro blocks her spear with his own. He then uses his signature fidget spinner move and disarms Ina. Ina reports her loss to the others and informs them that the human fidget spinner is actually pretty strong. His name is Rodrich, and being from a merchant family, he is also knowledgeable with accounting and the laws. However, she notices that Well wasn't listening. He had fallen asleep, since he was actually the one who prepared all the foods Elise brought today. Meanwhile, Erwin had just won his semifinal round. Unfortunately, he received a pretty deep wound in his shoulder, and to make matters worse, his next opponent is none other than the Knight Commander, Warren himself. The girls patch up Erwin's wounds while an official urges him to forfeit the next round. His wounds are too serious for him to continue. However, Erwin has already made up his mind to finish and win the whole thing. The girls reveal that they actually know what Brantag said to Erwin. Erwin points out that Brantag is just telling the truth, that he might become a liability. However, the girls show him their lunchbox and the food that Well prepared. That is proof that Well would probably never kick them out of their party. Erwin takes a bite out of himself and stands up. As a member of Well's party, he doesn't want to retreat against a foe. A few days later, Erwin and Ina started training under Warren's guidance. As for Louise, she invites Well to train with her and her master. They have to prepare as much as they can for the next 2 years in preparation for them becoming adults and proper adventurers. To Well's shock, it turns out that Louise's master is actually Armstrong. Well realizes that he might actually become a musclehead like them, but he happily joins their training. 3 years later, in the countryside of the Baumeister Knightdom, Well's family is trying in vain to improve their land. Kurt was reviewing some tax documents when his wife arrived bearing news. Visitors had arrived from the capital. Kurt was surprised that visitors came from such a faraway place, but he gets annoyed when he learns the topic of what they came about: his brother Well. At the castle, the visitor hands Kurt a letter from the capital's auditor. Kurt dismissively hands the letter to his wife and guesses that it's probably just another request to join Well's family. Kurt angrily tells the visitor that he doesn't care how famous Well becomes. However, his wife suddenly cries out after reading the letter. It turns out that Well had died after exploring an ancient ruin. A few days earlier, Well had successfully become a full-fledged adult and a licensed adventurer. He was so excited because in the past, he was always pressured by his noble obligations. But now, he is finally free to adventure where he likes. As their first mission, Brantag gives them a request from the king to explore some ancient ruins. It looks like Well is still the king's errand boy after all. Well's party heads into the dungeon with Brantag acting as their party advisor. Brantag warns them that adventurers were actually already sent to survey the ruins, but none of them returned. The guild then sent some veteran adventurers to check up on the earlier teams, but they also never returned. Thus, the guild came to the conclusion that there must be a dragon in the ancient ruins, and who better to defeat a dragon but the dragon slayer Well himself. Not only that, They also named their party the Dragon Busters after all. While walking through the tunnels, Well scolds his party members for hiding behind his back. Erwin, however, points out that only Well has experience fighting dragons, and if it breathes on them, they would surely die. Meanwhile, Brantag uses detection magic to recon the area before finally proceeding inside the ruins' doors. Surprisingly, the inside is empty once more, with no signs of the previous adventurers. Brantag abruptly senses something and shouts at everyone to get outside. Unfortunately, it was too late. The doors had already closed, and a magic circle appeared underneath their feet. The magic circle glued their feet to the floor, while Brantag shouted at everyone to prepare for anything that might happen. This was a trap left behind by the ancient magic civilization. All of a sudden, each of them vanishes one by one. Elise tries to grab Well's hand, but he also vanishes before she can do so. A few seconds later, she also vanishes away. When they wake up, they are now in another room entirely. A sign on the wall welcomes them to a thing called reverse hanging. Brantag surmises that the teleportation had brought them to the deepest level of the ruins. Now, they have to climb their way up and out of the ruins. Louise smiles at Well since Well can just teleport them anywhere. However, Well sadly informs them that for his teleportation spell to work, he has to have complete awareness of his destination and his current location. Unfortunately for them, they have no idea where they are right now, so he cannot just teleport them out of the way. The only thing they can do is to climb the stairs. They climb up to the next level of the ruins. Elise clings to Well's cloak in hurry, so Well gives her a smile, reassuring her. When they enter a room at that level, the door behind them abruptly closes and the soldier golems inside slowly awakens. Well was about to unleash his magic, but the others stopped him. They have no idea how many floors they have to climb, so it would be wise if they conserve Well's magic. The three warriors destroy the golems with their sword, spear, and fists. Meanwhile, Brantag and Well support them with magic to prevent them from being overwhelmed. After the fight, Elise heals their wounds. Ina spots skeletons lining the room's walls, and Brantag guesses that they must be the previous adventurers. When they head to the next stairs, it was also full of soldier golems. Thus, they went back into action, with Well giving one last sad look to the adventurers and wondering how much longer before they could escape. In the outside world, the king and Armstrong are starting to worry about Well's party. It has been 5 days without news, and other nobles are starting to say that Well is probably dead. In fact, the nobles are gossiping happily about Baron Baumeister's demise. When Cardinal Hohenheim passes by, they express their worry about his granddaughter. But Cardinal Hohenheim assures them that Well and Elise are still alive. When the cardinal turns around the corner, he bumps into Lord Commissioner Ruckner. They can then hear the nobles laughing from the corridor, and they wonder who is spreading the rumors of Well's death in the first place. Unbeknownst to them, the person spreading the rumor is actually the Lord Commissioner's own brother, Baron Ruckner, who is the current castle auditor. He also orders his men to send a letter to Kurt informing them of Well's death and hoping that his sons would inherit Well's title. This is all part of his convoluted plot to replace his own brother as the Lord Commissioner. Back in the ruins, everyone is haggard from the 5 days of non-stop fighting. Nevertheless, Well tries to keep a happy mood while sharing a meal with Elise. They are taking turns between fighting and resting, with only 2 hours of sleep. They are making progress, but they cannot keep it up forever. Floor after floor, the group decimates the golems waiting inside. However, their fatigue is also catching up to them, and their wounds are adding up. The next floor presented a much larger room with more soldiers inside, forcing them to use up more of their energy. Elise heals a wounded Erwin, who wonders if they are actually going to die soon. Elise cheers him up, and Erwin also reiterates that he would regret dying since he hasn't won against Warren, the Knight Commander, yet. His words of regret resonate within Elise, and she looks longingly at Well. Before entering the next floor, Elise encourages Well and tells him that they'll soon escape, or else she will regret not marrying him earlier. Her words cheer Well up, and they enter the next floor, ready for combat. Surprisingly, this floor was just a wide open space with no golem soldier in sight. Erwin shouts in relief, but Brantag is wary. In the distance, he spots a large statue. The statue slowly awakens and opens up its wings, revealing its form as a dragon golem. Brantag immediately casts barrier magic, and a few seconds later, the dragon's lightning breath hits them. Well casts his magic to support the shield. Unfortunately, soldier golems manage to sneak behind them and attack Ina. More golems come pouring in from the side doors and the whole room lights up. They are now surrounded, with the dragon in front and an army of golems at the back. Well and Brantag continue shielding their party against the dragon's breath, while Erwin and Louise hold back the tide of soldier golems. This gave Elise enough time to heal Ina up. Her injury was so severe that Elise spent all her mana, used the mana in her magic ring, and barely healed Ina back to full health. If this stalemate continues, Well and Brantag's mana would soon run out, and the dragon breath would end them. Thus, Well decides to defeat the golem. Brantag expresses his doubt that they can do it because the dragon's body is made up of mithril, but he decides to trust Well. He gives Well the remainder of his magic power, and Well pushes the dragon's breath back with a magic beam of his own. Soon, Brantag runs out of mana and he smiles at Well. Well had reminded him so much of Alfred. He then passes out, leaving Well to defeat the dragon alone. The others cheer Well on, but the dragon's strength proves too much. He was once again being pushed back by the dragon's attack. Feeling his consciousness fading, Well apologizes to everyone. However, Elise suddenly tells him that she'll be casting the magic, Miracle Light. In one quick movement, she kisses Well in the lips before passing out. Well catches her, and he can feel his magic increasing exponentially. His attack comes rushing back out in full force and finally hits the dragon, who slumps down on the ground dead. His death causes all the other golems in the room to shut down, allowing the others to rescue the now unconscious Well and Elise. A few hours later, Well is slowly waking up to see Louise and Ina talking about the fight earlier. Miracle Light is a healing spell used to restore stamina, but it can also restore mana in special circumstances. However, it doesn't require a kiss, so they probably guessed that Elise took that chance to get some sugar. After all, she would probably regret dying without kissing the man she loves. When Well and Elise wake up, they meet up with Brantag, who is studying this new location they're in. He had learned that the creator of this place was a mage famous for creating tons of magic items. He probably created everything to test people if they are worthy. Worthy of what? They will soon find out. Erwin and the others call out to them that they have found something really incredible. It was a huge shipyard with ancient airships, the very same airship that their current kingdom uses as a core to power their new airship. Not only that, Erwin presses a button and one of the walls of the warehouse opens up. They can finally escape the ancient ruins. For their discovery of 7 ancient airships, the ancient shipyard, the magic stones that power them, the soldier golems, the dragon golems, and research documents accompanying them. Each member of Well's party will be awarded 2 million gold coins. This would mean that none of them would ever have to worry about money ever again. Well then informed Armstrong that they are leaving the capital. They would rather base their adventures around their home dukedom, Brightburg. Armstrong promises to hunt down the culprit spreading the rumors of Well's death, which surprises Well because he had no idea what was happening in the castle during his absence. It seems like other nobles had become jealous of Well's success and were starting nasty rumors about him. Ina chimes in that they are actually also being harassed due to their close relationship with Well. And now, they are receiving 2 million gold, which will surely attract more and more unwanted attention towards them. She was actually hoping to use the guild's system of disputing the division of reward. Rather than them receiving 2 million each, they would rather redistribute it all back to Well. And since Elise is also Well's fiancée, she is already offering all of her assets to him. In summary, Well is now 10 million gold richer. Meanwhile, at Auditor Ruckner's mansion, the nobles conspiring against Well are having another meeting. They have decided to pool their resources to finally get rid of the annoyance that is Well. Outside of Well's mansion, a cloaked girl approaches. She spies inside and sees Well and the others having cookies. Well notices the movement by the window, but when he looks outside, no one is there. Nevertheless, he decides on hiring someone to guard the mansion after they go back to Brightburg. The high number of people angry at Well means that they need to hire someone strong and loyal. Thus, the others quickly suggest that they finally take on the human fidget spinner, Rodrich, as a retainer. It has been 3 years since Rodrich had wanted to become Well's retainer, so when Well finally accepted him, Rodrich couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Well notices something strange once again outside off the window, but the girl quickly drew back her head and hid. Later that day, the girl tries to spy again on them and spots them having lunch. Unfortunately, the others finally sense her presence. Louise quickly runs to the window while Erwin puts himself between the window and Well. But when they looked outside, the spy was already gone. Rodrich promises Well that he will find the spy and advises him to leave the capital as soon as possible. However, Well replies that he cannot do that because he still has something to do first. Meanwhile, the pink-haired spy had run all the way back to the city. That afternoon, Well and his friends visit the Magic Guild, the group that was studying the teleportation magic spell that Well discovered in the ancient ruins. The head researcher, Lucas, warmly welcomes them and shows them the magic circle that Well was interested in. It was a new prototype capable of summoning anything the user can imagine. Erwin smirks and guesses that a panty thief would love such a device. Well steps forward to use the magic circle. He closes his eyes and concentrates on the image he wants. A few seconds later, the object finally materializes in front of him. It was the panty that one of the mages was wearing. The female mage smacks Well while Elise looks jealous. Well insists that he was distracted by all the talks about being a panty thief, and it's not really the thing he wanted. He tries again, and this time, he succeeds. The summoning light was so huge that he probably summoned a giant's underwear or something. Later, the pink-haired spy watches as well, and his friends exit the Mage Guild's building, pulling out a large wagon. The spy tries to catch up with them, but Well teleports away back home. Meanwhile, outside Auditor Ruckner's mansion, Rodrich watches as the nobles conspiring against Well rides away in a carriage. He also spots Ruckner grinning wickedly in an upstairs window. The spy is back in Well's mansion, and when she peeps through the window, she sees Well having a huge party. It looks like he's throwing a going-away party before he leaves the capital in thanks to all the people who helped him. These include Duke Amadeus Bleichroder, Armstrong, Brantag, and even Cardinal Hohenheim. Well then wheels in a large dish full of sushi made from tuna. These were actually the items Well had summoned from the Mage Guild's teleportation circle. The nobles are curious how to eat the strange dish, so Well demonstrates how to eat it and how to use the soy sauce, something he developed for 3 years. The visitors love the taste, while the spy outside the window can just watch them enviously. Meanwhile, Rodrich reports his findings that Auditor Ruckner was the origin of the rumors about Well's death. Well was surprised since he never even talked to the auditor. But Rodrich explains that he was just being used to unseat Lord Commissioner Ruckner, who Well has strong ties to. Rodrich also reports how Ruckner had sent a messenger to Well's family, in the hopes that Kurt would feel indebted to the auditor, and when Kurt's sons inherit Well's title, this would in turn increase Auditor Ruckner's influence. Thankfully, Rodrich promises that he already has plans that would surely distract Auditor Ruckner in the days ahead. In his mansion, Auditor Ruckner learns that rumors about him being the one who conspired for Well to die in the ancient ruins were being spread throughout the city. Not only that, the castle had heard this rumor and is now summoning Auditor Ruckner. Of course, this was Rodrich's plan of using another false rumor to fight back. Rodrich also reveals that he is actually a bastard son of Auditor Ruckner. Elise then arrives to offer them some tuna, but the spy outside sees this and couldn't take it any longer. She breaks into the mansion and starts walking menacingly towards Well. Erwin tries to apprehend her, but she just flips him over like a pancake. She then charges straight towards Well, but to his surprise, she stops at the table and eats a slice of sushi. Lord Marshal Edgar, the kingdom's marshal, then forwards and introduces the girl as Wilma, his daughter. Wilma reveals that she's actually just investigating Well to see if he could feed her. She saw all the delicious tea, cakes, and sushi that Well had eaten throughout the day, so she could gladly tell Well that he passed. She then walks away with Elise to look for more food. Edgar apologizes for his daughter's behavior, while Brantag remarks that he could feel Wilma was sick with the hero syndrome. This means that she always has magic running through her muscles, making her extremely strong, but also has an enormous appetite. Ina and Elise immediately take a liking to Wilma, with the two wanting to feed the hungry girl fatty tuna. Edgar was actually hoping that Well hire Wilma as a bodyguard. He even offers her to him in marriage. Well rejects his offer and tries to point out that he just wants to go back adventuring and hunting monsters back in their dukedom. However, this makes Edgar realize something, and he asks Duke Amadeus if he's truly planning to make Well hunt monsters. Duke Amadeus smiles and tells the confused Well that he actually has a mission for him. All of these happened in the past few days. Back in the present, Kurt had just opened the letter telling them of Well's death. It also details how their son could inherit the title that Well left behind. Kurt laughs at his sudden good fortune, but his wife suddenly screams upon seeing something outside. When Kurt looked outside, it was Well and his friends. Brantag led the discussion between Well's party and his father. They explain how 15 years ago, the former Duke Bleichroder led an expedition into their forest in search of medicine. Unfortunately, this expedition resulted in the death of 2,000 soldiers. The corpses of those fallen had now become zombies, and the current Duke, Duke Amadeus, had just hired Well to purify them. What they want now is to discuss the handling of the monsters. Since the enchanted forest is under Baumeister territory, they would get a percentage of the sales from the raw materials obtained. The village chief, Klaus, chimes in that the normal percentage is 30%, but Kurt demands that this be raised to 50%. This was absurd, and Brantag even explains that they are willing to return any recovered items of the Baumeister soldiers to them. Hermann, the second brother, tries to plead to Kurt that they should be reasonable with the percentage, but Kurt was adamant. He reasons out that their soldiers didn't have many items, so they probably wouldn't get much. Moreover, they already held funerals for them. Elise remarks that any funerals won't give true peace to the dead unless their corpses are purified. As such, she is willing to conduct the funerals again after their mission succeeds. Kurt snobs her and asks her if she's actually just after the money from church donations. Fed up with his attitude, Erwin slams his hand on the table. Well quickly jumps in and tries to mediate between the two parties. However, Well's other friends point out that they are here to negotiate with the Lord, not with his heir. Kurt was about to argue back again, but thankfully, we were all saved by the loud grumbling of Wilma's stomach. It looks like she wants some of the famous Baumeister watery soup. That night, Kurt held a separate meeting with the men of their territory. The men are actually happy at the thought of their sons and brothers being finally given peace and purified. But Kurt insists that Well is just there for a job. He is not coming home. Bro is really insecure about his position. Meanwhile, those left in the castle are having dinner. Hermann explains to Well that their eldest brother became problematic after Well left. Kurt had always been afraid of Well returning and stealing his position as heir. Hermann's wife, Marlene, then arrives with the food. Wilma drools over all the food. While Marlene scolds Hermann for not offering Brantag some booze, Brantag declines, which surprises everyone. Meanwhile, Marlene also encourages Well on his mission. It turns out that her grandfather is one of the people killed during the expedition 15 years ago. Well promises to return any belonging he found of Marlene's grandfather, which makes Marlene praise Well's kindness and wish that he's the heir. Meanwhile, the others are starting to get worried that they might become caught up in a succession crisis. The next day, Well's party heads toward the enchanted forest to begin on their mission. They start slinging insults to the undead. Despite being zombies, the undead knows when they were being insulted and starts coming out in droves. The zombies seem to have brought a red filter, as everything suddenly turned red. Upon the zombies' arrival, Elise pulls out a magic circle and, together with Well, starts casting magic. A purification barrier rises around them. When the zombies pass the barrier, they disappeared. Erwin feels useless since they don't really do anything, but Brantag tells them that collecting the dead's belongings is also part of their mission. This continues until most of the undead are finally gone. Even the former Duke appeared and was purified upon touching the barrier. Now, the only one left is Marlene's grandfather. They were waiting for him to appear when an undead wyvern abruptly landed on their location. The wyvern attacks, but with one swing of her axe, Wilma decapitates the dragon. The purification magic then starts kicking in. Meanwhile, more and more undead animals are appearing. The party jumps into action and kills all of them. A few hours later, everyone is tired, and their purification magic disappears. Unfortunately, Marlene's grandfather is fashionably late and chose this moment to appear. Well approaches the undead, and to their shock, the undead talk. The undead had evolved into a lick. He asks them about his granddaughter, so Well explains that she is well. Not Well the main character, but well as in she is doing fine. The undead then drops his sword and allows Elise to peacefully purify him. After the success of their mission, they brought all the undead's belongings back to their families. The townsmen thank Well, but Kurt suddenly arrives to give an announcement. He orders the people to hand over all the collected armor and swords. The townspeople were reluctant because they were hoping to bury the armors since they couldn't bury their actual loved ones. But Kurt insists that their territory lacks the metal needed to cultivate their land. To satisfy both sides, Well summons a large block of iron and gives it to Kurt. Kurt was annoyed, but since Well would be leaving after his mission, he just walked away. Duke Amadeus promises Well that they would identify the owners of the rest of the belongings. Well was relieved that the mission is finally over, which means he can finally leave the conflict that is his family life. Unfortunately, the Duke orders him to remain on standby. As Well and his party leave, Duke Amadeus and Lord Commissioner Ruckner watch them. Their plan is still ongoing. When they returned, the village chief asked them if they wanted to join the funeral the next day. Elise leads the ceremony, while the townsmen further get angry at Kurt for not even attending his own people's funeral. A grand dinner was held at the town in remembrance of the fallen, and the townspeople offered Well some wine. Well refuses and insists they offer it to Brantag, but Brantag already refused earlier, which seemed strange to Well. He then spots Kurt's wife, Amalie, and her sons giving their respect to the dead. Her sons were starstruck upon meeting Well, and they asked him for some of his stories. Ina and Louise put on a show narrating Well's accomplishments, while Well offers them some homemade candies afterward. The celebration had ended, and it was late at night when the village chief met up with Well again. He quietly approaches Well and asks him to become the territory's heir. Well was surprised, but the village chief insists that this is what everyone wants, and they would have no future under Kurt. Well tells him that he just wants to be an adventurer, but the village chief points out that he can just leave a retainer like Rodrich to handle the day-to-day responsibilities. This way, Well can still go on adventures while also being their lord. Brantag abruptly appears and also informs Well that this is also the wishes of the royal family. Brantag reveals to Well the full details of the king's plan. It turns out that the crown had wanted to develop the southern part of the kingdom for several years already. Unfortunately, this had never been accomplished, since the lords of these lands had all been ordinary people for generations, and now the latest heir is both ordinary and a pain to deal with. They also cannot just order his father to step down because every lord in the country would get angry since they might be next. That was when the crown implemented their latest plan. They sent Well back to his family to provoke his brother into action. Then, they would make their father retire early to take responsibility for his heir's actions. This would pave the way for Well to become the lord, who is now much more famous with the peasants for his mission of purifying their dead loved ones. Brantag never even drank any liquor to ensure that Well would be safe despite his brother's scheming. Moreover, all the reward money Well has been receiving is actually in preparation for him developing the land. The next morning, Well shares the crown's plot with his party members. They were surprised that Well is agonizing over the decision, since Well usually just follows the king's orders. However, they soon understand when they see Well playing with his nephews. If Well agreed to become lord, these kids would lose their future as nobles. Unfortunately, they never noticed that the village chief was eavesdropping on their conversation. That evening, a commotion interrupts Well's dinner. The townspeople had arrived wanting to talk to their lord and petition him to put Well as the heir. Herman tries to make the townspeople see reason. but the townspeople insist that they aren't afraid of any punishments. They plead for Well to make the decision before he leaves tomorrow. Well was confused since he didn't make any plans to leave. Meanwhile, Brantag notices that the village chief is watching them from the bushes. He confronts him and warns him that the crown doesn't like citizens interrupting with their own plans. The village chief accedes to his warning and walks away. However, he also warns Brantag to be careful around Kurt's wife, Lady Amalie. His truth rings true since at that time, Lady Amalie is actually watching the confrontation outside from her window. Amalie also overhears Kurt talking to the few citizens he is close to. She witnesses how Kurt basically orders those who commit treason against him be punished severely. The following morning, Well is still thinking deeply on what he should do. He also learns from Brantag that if he ever accepts the position, Kurt wouldn't be exiled, but be permanently silenced to avoid complications. In his next meeting with Kurt, Well tries once again to make some compromises. He asks Kurt for some undeveloped land when he becomes lord. In return, Well promises to help him rank up and even provide funds. This way, everyone's lives would improve and their whole family even advances. Kurt would still get to inherit all the lands they currently possess, while Well would have to take over the undeveloped land. Kurt was disgusted by his offer. He assumes that Well just wants to swindle him and steadily steal away his authority. He also orders Well to leave. Outside, Well bumps into Amalie. Well admits to her that his compromise wouldn't make anyone happy, but it was the best way to avoid hurting anyone. Now, he doesn't know what to do anymore. Amalie sees his suffering and reveals that she doesn't care about anything as long as her children are safe. In fact, even now she is trying to make them closer to Well so Well wouldn't take away their nobility. Well thanks her for the conversation and leaves. Back at his place, Well tells his friends that he will accept the position of lord. However, he won't let anyone die, so he asks them for their help. Everyone smiles at him and assures him that they will always be on his side. The next day, each one of them opens up a bazaar in town, with Well selling homemade condiments, Louise selling clothes, Ina with handcrafts, and Erwin with weapons. The townsfolk immediately flock to buy their wares. Kurt's supporters get frustrated since Well was stealing all of their customers, and they quickly express their complaint to Kurt. They ask Kurt if they should just kill Well, but Kurt quickly shuts them down. They are facing a magician, and they would all surely die if they do that. Kurt's supporters were returning to the village when Well abruptly appeared in front of them. They have been surrounded. The next morning, Kurt's last henchman reports the ambush to Kurt. However, they weren't hurt, but instead, all of Kurt's henchmen had now turned against him. Well had offered them funds and even training to improve their stores. Well is hoping that this would push Kurt to finally do something. Meanwhile, he and Roderich are looking for good places for Amalie and his sons to stay once the whole scandal erupts. As for Kurt, they are planning to send him to a church so that at least he won't be killed by the crown. All that Well needs to do is to convince Cardinal Hohenheim of his plan. Regarding other concerns, Roderich reports that more and more people are requesting Well for meetings. Lord Commissioner Ruckner and Lord Marshal Edgar are already close to Well, so more nobles are trying to cozy up to him as the balance of power shifts. Meanwhile, another plot is also afoot. Auditor Ruckner hands over an artifact to his subordinate and orders him to deliver it to Kurt. A few days later, Kurt was angry when only one person arrived at their meeting. Everyone else now supports Well, and the last person admits that he actually also received an offer from Well to train in the capital. He quickly exits the room, leaving Kurt in despair. Left with no choice, Kurt takes his knife and prepares himself to kill Well. However, a voice asks him if that would be enough. It was the auditor's subordinate. The auditor's subordinate then gives him an artifact and explains that it's a magic item called the Dragon's Flute. After handing over the artifact, the auditor's subordinate apologizes to Kurt for giving him mistaken information regarding Well's death. As an apology, they are giving him the artifact without any monetary payment. All they want in exchange is that they favor them during the negotiations for the undeveloped land. Kurt smiles and happily agrees. A few days later, Brantag senses Kurt arriving alone at the forest. They had left rumors of Well entering the forest alone, and they had hoped to bait Kurt into finally attacking him. Their plan of getting Kurt into a scandal is now in its final stages. They are actually surprised that Kurt went alone, but Brantag guesses that this probably meant Kurt had an ace up his sleeve. Well approaches Kurt in the middle of the forest and pretends that they just accidentally bumped into each other. However, Kurt calls out his acting and shouts to Well's retainers to appear. Thus, everyone else had no choice but to step out of the forest. Kurt sighs in exasperation at his youngest brother. He was able to slay a giant dragon, earn the title of Baron, and now he is even trying to steal the heir position from him. He warns Well not to move and threatens to blow the dragon's flute that he pulls out behind him. Brantag's eyes widened upon seeing the artifact. He quickly explains to Well that the dragon flute can summon dragons by blowing on it. Whoever named that flute is a genius. Ino points out that fighting dragons is not a new thing to them, but Brantag argues that they never fought more than one at the same time. If Kurt blew on that flute, every dragon from the nearby mountains would immediately converge on them, and even Well's considerable magic power won't last long. Elise tries to appeal to Kurt's compassion by reminding him that the dragons would also attack the citizens, but Kurt doesn't care about them anymore. In his mind, everyone had betrayed him. Even if his family dies, he can just create another one. He would steal Well's assets, make himself a great hero, and when women flocked to him, he would just get a new son and everything would be the way it should be. Well cannot move against Kurt's threats, so Brantag decides to slowly make a move of his own. As Kurt continues his crazy rants and complaints, Brantag abruptly attacks him with a magic laser. However, the laser seems to bounce off the flute. Kurt smiles creepily and blows on the flute. The sky starts to rumble and ghosts rise from the ground as Kurt blows up an absolutely banging tune. Bro should have just started a band instead of becoming a noble. Unfortunately for Kurt, the ghosts started crowding around him. Well was about to jump to his rescue, but Wilma grabs him and stops him from putting himself in danger. The flute, as it turns out, wasn't actually a dragon's flute. Brantag already had suspicions, since a dragon's flute is a legendary item and is not something so easily obtained. Brantag hypothesizes that the flute is actually a flute of malice. Once a flute of malice is used, it draws malice from the surroundings and empowers the user enough to defeat his or her enemy. However, the user would eventually become an undead. Meanwhile, Kurt continues to play the flute while dark thoughts fill his head. His sight literally turns red while looking at Well. The ghosts then converge around him and transform him into a gigantic monster, with Kurt as its core. Brantag urges Well to quickly cast his holy magic and insists that his brother is already dead. However, Well can only stare at his brother as the monster delivers a punch with his boulder-like fist. The fist was blocked with a golden light as Elise steps forward to do the purifying. Unfortunately, the monster was too strong and Elise was pushed back. Elise was ready to sacrifice herself to stop the monster, but Well finally wakes up from his stupor and runs forward to help. He instructs Elise to expand the magic, just like they did in the enchanted forest. With one last look at his brother's corpse, Well starts pushing his magic out. The golden light soon covers up the whole monster, and it gets purified, leaving only the magic flute to fall back to the ground. Meanwhile, Kurt's malevolent spirit flies across the kingdom. In his mansion, Auditor Ruckner is discussing using his son Rodrich against Well when the spirit suddenly breaks in through the window. It heads directly to Ruckner and attacks him. The next day, knights have cordoned off Ruckner's mansion. Well and Rodrich are also there and learn that Ruckner along with his conspirators had died from the spirit. As for the spirit, it has already been purified by priests. It seems that the spirit was part of the monster that Well purified, but it was guided there by Kurt's hatred. Unfortunately, there is a rumor already going around that it was Kurt who did all of these things. This would mean it would be difficult for Amelie and her sons to relocate there. In the end, Amelie and her sons relocated and lived with Herman. Well hated how people called him a hero, but now he couldn't even save a single person. He also despises how every noble has their own agenda and plots behind each other's backs. However, Brantag points out that Well himself is a noble with his own plots. This makes Well realize his own hypocrisy, and he spends the whole day in silence, reflecting while walking around town, and even during dinner surrounded by his friends. Later that night, Well asks Elise if he ever seemed to be out of touch with reality. Elise admits that she actually noticed Well acting strange. Sometimes Well feels so far away from her, even when he is close by. Well realizes that he must be still thinking like his old life was his real life and not this one. That he hasn't yet accepted the reality of this world. Elise holds Well's hand and Well smiles. He promises that from now on, he'll try to become a proper noble. When Well was next summoned by the king granted him all the undeveloped land confiscated from the Baumeister knightdom. In addition, he also asks Well what he wants as a reward. In turn, Well mentions how 12 noble positions had opened up due to the deaths in Auditor Ruckner's home. Thus, he wishes to be able to grant 2 of these positions himself. The king's face turns serious, since the king should be the only one able to grant titles. Lord Marshal Edgar scolds Well for his audacity, and Cardinal Hohenheim orders him to rescind his request. However, Lord Edgar then insists that they should grant the undeveloped land to someone else. Lord Amadeus speaks up in defense of Well, but the others accuse him of only trying to increase his own dukedom. The nobles start arguing once more until Armstrong shouts at them to be quiet. He then instructs Well to rescind his request too, since he clearly disturbed the peace of the palace. Instead, Armstrong petitions the king to grant him a portion of the undeveloped land himself. The king finally takes control of the conversation and rejects Armstrong's offer. He instead reiterates that Well would be the one to develop these lands. Meanwhile, Armstrong secretly winks at Well. His plan to help Well worked. This proves that Armstrong isn't only Armstrong, but Armsmart as well. Thus, the king grants Well the right to bestow 2 noble titles as well as increase his rank to count, and everyone claps. Later, the king smiles while complimenting how smart Well had become. He commends the acting of everyone but scolds Armstrong for being too obvious. Armstrong boisterously laughs. It looks like the king had been able to see through all of their plots. Back in the countryside, Well tells Amalie that he plans to grant the 2 noble titles to her sons when they come of age. Amalie's eyes sparkle in pleasant surprise, and she tells Well that her sons would understand how their father's death was due to Kurt's own undoings. Meanwhile, Well starts the project of developing his new land. In fact, this was the same exact scene that happened at the start of episode 1. They planned to clear more lands, especially for the church that Cardinal Hohenheim sponsored, and the facilities that Lord Commissioner Ruckner, Lord Marshal Edgar, and Duke Amadeus are planning to build. These are all in exchange for their support and help in getting Well the right to grant the 2 noble titles earlier. However, they wouldn't be able to intervene in one special thing. Well pulls out a blueprint, and in it is drawn the plans for a whole miso and soy sauce workshop. The others soon start arriving with their own requests for the day, making Well confused but happy with his new busy noble life. That night, Well happily shares a meal with his friends, and he realizes that being the 8th son wasn't so bad after all.